I acknowledge and pay respects to the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional and original owners and continuing custodians of this land on which we gather today, and acknowledge elders past and present. And I'd like to acknowledge Tasmanian Aboriginal people who are in the audience of this event today. My name is Noel Fittock, and over the past 3.5 years, I've played a role in supporting a transition of the Tasmanian Child Safety Service from a forensically driven child rescue approach to a public health approach rooted in the concepts underpinning social wellbeing. My presentation today will explore what that transition means to children and families, to the child safety workforce, and to the broader service system. It's funny where one draws inspiration from when faced with a task like leading change within a child protection system. Desmond Tutu, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, offers a simple piece of advice when confronting the big issues in life. There is only one way to eat an elephant, a bite at a time. For people who know Matt Healy, the Executive Director who led the Strong Family Safe Kids reform up to its end in June last year, you may have heard Matt repeat these same famous words. Unfortunately, I didn't have a photo of Matt, so I chose to use Desmond, who is the original source. Mr. Spock is also a well-known and in many quarters much-loved character, offering many words of wisdom. A disciple of the Vulcan philosopher Surak, Mr. Spock peppered my adolescence with words of wisdom about the meaning of life. As an adult, hanging out in the adult work environment, I soon heard colleagues over years and work environments make comments about whether change in the work environment was a positive thing or not. You're no doubt familiar with the much repeated lines of, "This is just change for the sake of change." I've never been quite sure what that frequently muttered statement actually meant. I would much prefer to embrace Mr. Spock's words of wisdom that change is the essential process of all existence. Child protection systems around the world require parents to recognise the things in their lives that need to change for their children to be safe and well. Parents and communities also require child protection to recognise the things in its system that also need to change for parents and children to be safe and well. Change is an essential process for us all. So let's move from philosophy to history. The story starts in the USA in the 1870s in the case of Mary McCormack, a 10-year-old who was physically abused by her adopted mother. The intervention by the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in Mary's case triggered the rise of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, first in New York and then in the UK, and Australia followed not long after. In 1962, the paediatrician Dr. Henry Kemp identified the battered child syndrome. These were crimes against children by a small number of sick or evil, to use Kemp's words, parents that resulted in the physical injury or death of a child. Over the following years, the definition of child abuse was expanded and applied to all children pre-birth to 18 years of age, and by the end of the 20th century, most Western child protection services couldn't cope with the volume of children being notified. There was a growing realisation that there was a problem within the system. But on that battered child syndrome assumption, the modern child protection system was developed, and you will recognise it. Its purpose is to identify children pre-birth to 18 years who are or who might be harmed physically, emotionally, sexually, through neglect or exposure to family violence, to rescue them, to prosecute their parents in court, to remove their parental rights, and to keep those children forever safe in the care of the state. There is a growing agreement that Kemp's view was specifically one-dimensional, and he completely missed the impact of poverty on the safety and well-being of children, a condition which affects many, many more children and families than the number of children harmed through non-accidental injury or death, as abhorrent as those crimes are. Add to this that Kemp never really landed a set of distinct characteristics or behaviours associated with this syndrome, means that predicting or even identifying these evil parents is not possible. The only reliable characteristics are of children experiencing maltreatment, and these tend to be around the indicators of poverty. We are looking to change the narrative started by Kemp. In August 2015, the Tasmanian government committed to a comprehensive redesign of the child protection services in Tasmania, and Professor Maria Harries of the University of Western Australia was engaged to lead this work. What Professor Harries found through her reviews was that there was an ever-growing number of children and families notified to child protection services, and although these children and families were likely to be in need of significant assistance, most of the notifications were not accepted as reaching the threshold for an investigation. So that is, children and their families were in significant distress. However, a child safety investigation was not the solution to that distress. Children who did come into statutory care were remaining longer, and their outcomes in care were and continue to be uncertain at best. Many families were receiving no assistance before they were investigated, and many reported receiving no assistance after investigation. Significantly, Professor Harries found that by the time children entered the formal care system, they had generally churned through the notification portal and the investigation process a number of times. The Strong Family Safe Kids implementation plan was developed following the release of Professor Harries' report, with 30 actions identified to resolve these issues. The findings from the 2015-16 review remain relevant today, although we are starting to see the impact of a change to the front door of this system as the Strong Family Safe Kids advice and referral line deepens its impact. And there is no doubt that the broader service system is working with a greater sense of unity. It's worth just reflecting on what the core components of the redesign and the implementation plan were, inspired by Professor Harries' review. So the first strategy was building a common understanding of child wellbeing and safety, so really placing wellbeing at the centre. The release of the Child and Youth Wellbeing Framework has gone a long way to reinforce the success of that strategy. The second strategy was creating a shared approach to assessment and planning for vulnerable or under-resourced families. And again, the Child and Family Wellbeing Assessment tool is assisting in that process as it's increasingly being used both within Child Safety Service and across the broader service system. Changing the purpose and the narrative by resetting the front door to Child Safety Service and the family support system, placing the concerns for children and family at the centre and asking what's the right service to address the concern, and not is this a concern for you or for us to address, which all too often became a conversation about service thresholds and children and their parents bouncing from service to service. Strengthening the family service sector by building stronger interventions for families who were at the very edge of the care system, and the Intensive Family Engagement Services, a group of community sector services who work with families and Child Safety Service to assertively address concerns that, if left unattended, would result in children entering care. And the last strategy was finishing the redesign of child protection services that started with the change of the front door through the advice and referrals service, and aimed to prioritise relationships and to shift from a child rescue through authority to a relationship approach based on partnership. To progress Strategy 5 of the Strong Family Safe Kids implementation plan, we engaged our workforce in an extensive consultation to explore their views on what a quality child safety service would look and feel like. Consultations were also held with our service partners and included engagement with carers and parents. What continued to emerge from these conversations was a strong message that helping children means working well with the adults around them. So building and maintaining a relationship with those adults and strengthening the engagement of children, young people and parents and carers in every decision that affects their lives. There was an understanding that some children are unsafe in Tasmania because they have a parent or caregiver who engages in criminal child abuse, and that there does need to be an effective response to protect children when this is the case. But there was also a very clear understanding that more often children are unsafe because of the complex social, economic, personal and cultural challenges faced by their adult caregivers and the impact these factors have on the behaviour of those caregivers. The challenge faced by child safety workers is being able to keep children safe whilst work occurs to address the complex emotional, social and environmental factors that their carers and parents live in, whilst maintaining relationships between parent and child, and even more challenging between parent and the child safety service. The maintaining of this relationship is essential given the intention is to rebuild safety at home. The approach that emerged from these consultations is one that recognises that social environments adults live in and the social environments that adults live in and invites all child safety employees to be curious about what factors lock this family into these behaviours and to ask how can we work together to free them of those factors. So what are the practice areas of child safety work that will reshape our approach from a forensic to a social wellbeing system? Well, the Tasmanian Child Safety Service knows that the safety and wellbeing of children and young people is directly linked with the safety and wellbeing of the adults who care for them, their community and their culture. So the Child Safety Service, the social wellbeing model, will refresh our approach by investing in practice that meets the needs of Aboriginal families and recognises that this is a benchmark for best practice for all families. By understanding that the safety and wellbeing of children and young people is reliant on the social, economic and cultural wellbeing of the adults who care for them, and privileging an investment of time in building and repairing relationships with those adults. Embedding and maintaining respectful relationships with parents and caregivers through shared decision making and collaborative team approach to service delivery. And committing to building stability in the lives of children and young people by strengthening and supporting them and the adults who care for them where they currently live and at the homes that they are returning to. By placing responsibility on the service system to offer coordinated, accessible and timely services to children, young people and their families. And acknowledging the complexity, uncertainty and rapidly changing nature of working with under-resourced families and adopting a strengths-based, whole-of-service, whole-of-system continuous improvement strategy. By empowering our workforce to be critically reflecting, curious and continually growing their practice through clear practice leadership, and creating the right lens through which to understand and assess the 6 domains of wellbeing as outlined in the Tasmanian Child and Youth Wellbeing Framework. The redesign is refocusing our response to children and young people by changing our response to the adults that care for them. The key areas for change then at a service level focuses on building the practice leadership and support around the workforce to strengthen collaborative and inclusive decision making and the deep analysis that must underpin professional judgment. So strengthening our ability to guide the development of practice through clear and close leadership, supporting real-time decision making, leading learning, reflection and practice development. by enabling teams to analyse information and to critically think together, making decisions together and reflecting and learning together. Teams where the needs of families and children are worked as a collective unit using collaborative and inclusive decision making, strengthening the role of care teams and care plans. We'll shift our language and focus from investigation to assessment by building a holistic child and family assessment approach that considers the full range of psychosocial factors that affect safety and underpins well-being, building on the Signs of Safety assessment approach, the harm matrix, and incorporating the child and family wellbeing assessment tool. And ultimately, the Child Safety Service will shift its culture away from authoritative protection and removal to ensure safety to a culture focused on promoting real and long-lasting change in the lives of families by building safety and wellbeing in partnership with the adults who care for children and young people. These changes place the quality of decision at the centre, fixing in place collaborative and inclusive decision making supported by sound analysis and recognising what is needed to enable quality professional judgment to get the best outcome for children. So, with the Signs of Safety practice skills and approach firmly placed on the back of every child safety employee with access to the full support of a collaborative team approach with the right practice leadership to support and guide, child safety teams are resourced and supported to see the child, young person and the adults who care for them through the lens of their social, economic, cultural and personal circumstances, to understand how to, in partnership with them, build their safety and well-being. In summary, this is how the broader Strong Family Safe Kids reform wraps around the Child Safety Service redesign. The Child and Youth Wellbeing Framework focuses on the broad service system, on the biopsychosocial aspects of wellbeing for all children. This framework enables a new focus to be adopted by the Child Safety Service, where an investment in relationship with adults who care for children is at the heart. The approach to our service delivery supports and strengthens our practice approach and enables the use of the Signs of Safety methodology with integrity. And collectively, this drives better outcomes against the 6 domains of wellbeing for children, young people, where, whether they are on the edge of care, whether they're in care, or whether they're transitioning from home or to independence from care. So as the Child Safety Service redesign reaches its end and prepares to transition into business as usual to continue the transformation of services from forensic to social wellbeing, I find myself reflecting on the changes made over the past 5 years, radiating from the Strong Family Safe Kids reform, and recognise that there are still quite a few mouthfuls of elephant yet to work through, and that change through continuous improvement is only logical. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. Just to double check again, everyone can hear me? Let me know if you can't. Perfect. All right, so now we'll welcome Noel to the screen. Hi, Noel.
Unmute. Hello.
Perfect. Don't worry, that's how we started the session today. We're on a roll. Well, if you're ready, we've got a few questions to get through, so we might get going if that's all right. All right, so first up, someone's asked, you mentioned consulting various parties about what a quality child safety service might look and feel like, but is there a reason why a youth voice was not consulted, and is there room for this kind of consultation in the future?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid question. We had been liaising with the child advocate who works with children, youth and families and actually sits on this level that I'm on in the Marine Board building. She runs Youth Change Makers. Unfortunately, there were a range of challenges at the time to being able to capture the voice of young people and children specifically who were in care. However, we did consult with carers, and a couple of carers brought children along with them, so children who were in care. And I can certainly reflect on one young person in particular who provided us with a really fantastic insight into what was working for him and what wasn't working for him as a young person in care. I think there are always points of improvement when reflecting on processes that you've gone through. And certainly one of the areas that I know would have informed our thinking even more would have been better engagement with young people. Although having said that, I think that the messages coming out of surveys and reports through CREATE, we also consulted with those documents and pretty much knew where we needed to make those improvements in child safety. So really focusing on leaving care plans, really focusing on that inclusive decision making and engaging young people, more assertively in having a voice about what they need from child safety services.
Wonderful, that's really good to hear. So I'll go to our next question, which is, the social wellbeing model sounds fantastic, but also as though its application will be resource intensive. How will resources be distributed to support its application, particularly for staff who may already be struggling with unmanageable caseloads?
Yeah, I think that it's the greatest rub in any child protection system, especially a system, possibly any system where you can't control the demand for service, and where there's always a responsibility to respond to service. So we're acutely aware that slowing down practice and investing time and energy into building relationships with families who we're not usually seeing them at their best. So we usually need to do a lot more to help build that relationship and that trust, will mean slowing down and perhaps elongating the engagement with families. So some of the things that we've done to try and address that resource deficit inside child safety is to bring a resource that we call our clinical practice consultant and educators, who have sat on the edge of guiding practice more closely into the child safety service and its everyday delivery of practice. So we're hoping that by doing that, child safety officers will have better access to real-time decision making and real-time consultation, which will create some efficiency. I think that it's also important to note that we're not the only change happening in child safety. There are a whole heap of other activities that are happening that aims to create more efficiency in the child safety system, to create more capacity for child safety officers to really invest in relationship. Some of those include things like trying to make changes to our client information system so that child safety officers aren't having to go in and out of the system so much. Being able to utilise the care team. So that's a whole heap of people who wrap around families, including the families, the parents themselves and carers, who can help make decisions and perhaps help with the implementation of some interventions. So really trying to build capacity by improving systems and processes, and also improving the number of people who are working with the family and with us. If I had the opportunity to invest more money in child safety, I of course would do that. But unfortunately, they're big decisions made by government, and there's obviously competing priorities that have to be taken into consideration.
There was a large investment made into child safety as a result of Strong Family Safe Kids. And so I'll just talk a little bit. Some of those were the CPCEs, those clinical practice consultant educators, but also our intensive family engagement services are community sector services who work with child safety, who didn't exist back in the day. They're an additional resource to help to engage with families who would have automatically come into child safety, but to engage with them a little bit earlier. So that's also an additional resource that helps that relational approach that we're trying to adopt.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I'll move on to our next one, which is how can families and community service workers or organisations provide feedback or suggestions to child safety around ongoing reforms or ideas?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think one of the areas that Child Safety Service and Children, Youth and Families as an organisation generally is really aware that we have to develop and then implement a process of seeking feedback with much more purpose and intention. At the moment, we get that information, that feedback informally, or unfortunately we get it through ministerial requests for information, or through the Ombudsman, or the various commissions, Children's Commission and the like. And really we need to be much more proactive and much more mindful of actually reaching out and seeking that feedback. We are looking to develop a quality improvement framework. We've had versions of, but we are looking to develop and implement one that specifically has as part of its core components reaching out to our stakeholders, but importantly also reaching out to our service users and to our own workforce and asking them what we need to know about ourselves so that we can improve the way we deliver our services. It's always, I think, tricky when you're a statutory authority to assume somehow that you have you're on the side of right, and sometimes that negates hearing with a really open ear and open heart that feedback. But I think certainly our quality improvement framework will seek to really enhance receiving and then actioning that feedback.
Okay, thank you. So someone's just asked as well, what's changed to assist young people aged from 10 years and up who are not involved with child safety, especially in regards to accommodation?
Yeah, I'd really love to be able to answer that question, but I'm probably not in the best position to answer that, given my focus has been very much on working with within the child safety service or on the edge of child safety service. I am aware that there are there's some strategies looking at homelessness for children under 16, but I can't really comment on the specific activities against that strategy.
No worries, thank you anyway. Our next question we have is, cultural change is difficult. The wellbeing framework is a very different way of working for child safety. Who is going to drive this change so that momentum is not lost long term?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good question as well. Really is about eating that elephant one bite at a time. So where we've really tried to invest our resource right now to get the best bang for our buck and to maintain that long-term investment has been in looking at our leadership structure. So I don't want to call it management, because that is really misleading, but basically we've looked at our senior practitioners, people who are leading child safety officers and support workers, the people who are leading the team leaders who are working supporting the child safety officers and support workers, and all the way down and all the way up. and working out what kind of a leadership approach do we really want to invest in child safety that will continue that development toward relationship. We often talk in child safety about that parallel process. If we want child safety officers to invest in relationships with families in order to be able to help create safety for children in families, then we need to have a leadership approach that invests in our workforce. So we've really been focusing on that. One of the core components of that are the development of some senior leadership positions that we're calling at the moment principal practice managers. And they are people who ultimately hold responsibility for that continuous process of implementing a social wellbeing model and finding ways of developing good systems, processes, and enablers to help child safety officers really make that shift towards a social wellbeing approach. And then I suppose at an organisational level, to be able to, when things go wrong, because when you work in child safety, things often go wrong, but when things go wrong, to resist that knee-jerk reaction of shrinking back to a very forensic and hard-lined approach. So we have to build the resilience within the organisation to be able to say, yeah, sometimes we're going to have bad outcomes. That doesn't mean that our approach is the right way, is the wrong way. So really being able to build that resilience long-term into child safety service and into the organisation overall. I hope that answers the question. It's a hard one.
I think it was a great answer. Thank you for that. So someone else as well has asked, which programs or agencies do child safety refer parents or carers to for support for any areas of concern?
Yeah, wow, loads of them really. I'm not going to list them all, but child safety service doesn't do any of the work it does by itself. So many of the people who are attending this conference will know that we're working towards a public health approach to keeping children safe in Tasmania. And so that means that there are services at every level of the service continuum who are engaged. So family support services, some of those are located within large community sector organisations. Some of them are located in community centres and neighbourhood houses. So engaging with them, engaging with more universal services like child and family centres and health services. Obviously working very closely with Department of Education, both at the schools level and at the department level, and with their support services. I mean, I could go on forever. We work very closely with police as well, but primarily we're building relationships and have very, very strong relationships with community sector, family-focused services and education and their child and family centres in particular. And obviously, given the nature of the work that we're engaged in, we also have very strong relationships with out-of-home care providers as well. So there's services who engage foster carers and who support those foster carers to deliver really good care to children whilst they're in care.
That was very comprehensive. Thank you. So we actually just have one more question we might go through quickly, if that's all right. So what does child safety do to support the social, cultural and economic well-being of parents or carers?
Yeah, probably not as much as I hope we will be able to do in the future. I think the first step in being able to impact in those areas is to acknowledge that they exist and to spend some time understanding those pressures on families. Sometimes child protection systems have defaulted to assessments that really just aim to rule in or rule out whether abuse has occurred or is occurring, and have neglected to think about what are the factors that are creating that unsafe space in a child's home or within their family. So we are, I suppose, the first step is acknowledging that we need to broaden our understanding of the risk factors that impact, or the factors rather that impact on risk, and how we mitigate those factors goes a long way to securing safety. Old thinking would have been, well, removing kids mitigates those risk factors. And we're trying to turn that around by saying, yes, that's one strategy, but there are better strategies that also include, what's the impact of unemployment and financial pressure on the way I might parent? What's the impact of my own mental health or my own self-confidence on the way I might parent? And then enabling child safety officers to say, well, we should be able to intervene there somehow, either by linking parents up to the right services, or advocating for them through Centrelink, or finding other strategies that the family and their support networks might be able to identify. So the first step is really that we are giving child safety services the permission to focus on those factors that impact on safety and well-being, and then we will build from there.